On behalf of State Superintendent Joy Hoffmeister and the Office of Federal Programs, my name is Tom Kirk, and we will be talking today about programs for children and youth who are neglected, delinquent, or at risk. So the areas we will talk about are, first of all, the purpose of the program. Then we have a number of definitions that we need to clarify. Then we'll discuss which federal title programs are involved in this program and who can receive funds, how these federal funds can be used. We'll spend a moment talking about contracts and waivers, and then finally the October count, which is the annual neglected and delinquent census that will be starting here in a couple of weeks. The forms for that will go out next week. I also have some slides at the end with some sources and resources. We probably won't show those here very long, but if you would like a copy of this PowerPoint, I'd be happy to send it to you with all those links on them. So the purpose of the program is to improve educational services for children and youth in local, tribal, and state institutions for neglected or delinquent children and youth, so that such children and youth have the opportunity to meet the same challenging state academic standards that all children in the state are expected to meet, and to provide such children and youth with the services needed to make a successful transition from institutionalization to further schooling or employment. And finally, to prevent at-risk youth from dropping out of school and to provide dropouts and children and youth returning from correctional facilities or institutions for neglected or delinquent children and youth with a support system to ensure their continued education and the involvement of their families and communities. So we need to define exactly who are these children. The law mentions neglected, delinquent, and at risk. The first of these categories are neglected children, and they are defined as those students enrolled in school who are placed in facilities due to abandonment, neglect, or death of parents or guardians. Local educational agencies, or LEAs, in Oklahoma operate 42 programs, or at least at the end of last year, they operated 42 programs serving roughly 3,000 students a year who are classified as neglected students. Delinquent children are those age 21 or younger who are pre-adjudicated or adjudicated to be placed in a facility. These children attend on-site school rather than public schools. There are roughly 3,000 children served by such sites operated by LEAs, by the Office of Juvenile Affairs, and by the Department of Corrections. And finally, at-risk children are those defined as being susceptible to academic failure in the future due to a variety of issues. The main issues here are drug or alcohol problems, pregnancy or parenthood, contact with the juvenile justice system, falling behind 1 or more years academically, membership in or affiliation with a gang, or previously having dropped out of school. And there are currently 17 programs in Oklahoma serving around 1,000 at-risk youths each year. So, with these definitions in mind, I've added a slide to the presentation this year about identifying kids in your student information system so that they are properly identified in the wave. And I'm doing this is kind of for administrative purposes. We're trying to upgrade the reports, the end of year reports, so that as much as possible is pre-populated. In your student information system, there should be a neglected or delinquent question, and that will give you 2 options, yes or no. And if you choose yes, it will open up these 4 other categories, which are neglected. And these would be, as defined above, kids who are in neglected facilities for neglect, abandonment, or death of parents and guardians. In that case, you would neglected. In Oklahoma, these are almost exclusively facilities that are contracted with DHS and kids who are in DHS custody or who have been placed in a facility by DHS. There are three other categories there under neglected and delinquent, which would put you in the delinquent category for administrative purposes and for reporting purposes. And that would be at-risk youth, those who are at risk of dropping out or failure for the reasons mentioned above, kids in juvenile detention or juvenile corrections. These are slightly different terms. Juvenile corrections are generally kids who are in custody of the Department of Corrections, whereas juvenile detention are in facilities that are contracted with the Office of Juvenile Affairs or directly in juvenile affairs custody. So the title programs that we're talking about are all part of Title I. The first is Title I Part A, neglected. This is a set aside from the state Title I Part A allocation that then gets reallocated to districts who are working with the neglected facilities. And then Title I Part D, which is further divided into subparts 1 and 2. We'll get into this in more detail in a minute, but subpart 1 is the part that deals with state agencies. So the Department of Corrections and the Office of Juvenile Affairs. Subpart 2 is the one that I'm sure interests most of the people on the webinar today. That is the part that is allocated directly to LEAs. So Title 1A, neglected. The LEAs who receive a Title 1A neglected allocation, that's Project 518, do so because they indicated on last year's October count that they have children or youths enrolled in their school who reside in a locally operated facility for neglected youth. These LEAs are required to use their neglected funds to provide services to neglected children and youths comparable to the services provided in Title I schools. So in simpler terms, if there is a facility for neglected kids in your district, and those kids attend the local school, which is the most common situation, and let's say the school they attend is not a Title I school, you can, through Title 1A neglected, provide Title I services to those kids, even though the school is not a Title I school. Title 1D is broken down into two subparts, and these can be used for a broad range of programs. Subpart 1 funds are available to state agencies, as I mentioned before, agencies that run educational programs for children and youths who are neglected, delinquent, or at risk, and for children and youths in adult correctional facilities. So that's Department of Corrections and Office of Juvenile Affairs in Oklahoma. Subpart 2 funds are available to LEAs that provide programs serving children and youths housed in locally operated detention facilities, or children and youths who are neglected or at risk. So the most common situation here is there's a facility for delinquent kids, a facility contracted with OJA that's located within the boundaries of your school district, and you provide services to those kids. So here I'm going to start with Title I Part D, Subpart 1. This is for state agencies, so this probably doesn't directly regard most of the people on this webinar, but I want to cover it anyhow. State agencies, so DOC and OJA, can receive Subpart 1 funds, which they then distribute to eligible institutions. These institutions can be either public or private facilities operating for the care of children and youth who are neglected or delinquent. They provide free public education and a regular program of instruction. In each case, the average length of stay must be at least 30 days. Okay, so this is different from subpart 2, that this targets kids who are longer term in facilities. And there are 4 types of institutions that fall under subpart 1. That is adult correctional institutions. This is a facility in which persons, including those under age 21, are confined as a result of a conviction for a criminal offense. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Number 2, an institution for delinquent children and youth. This could be a public or private residential facility other than a foster home, operated for the care of children and youth who have been adjudicated delinquent or in need of supervision. 3, an institution for neglected children and youth, public or private residential facility other than a foster home, operated for the care of children and youth who have been committed to the institution or voluntarily placed there under applicable state laws due to abandonment, neglect, or death of parents or guardians. Okay, this is extremely rare in Oklahoma because we have 2 separate state agencies, OJA and DHS, with pretty clear boundaries. In other states, that's not always the case. Number 4, a community day program. That is a regular program of instruction provided at a community day school operated specifically for neglected or delinquent children or youth. Okay, again, these are the 4 types of institutions that subpart 1 funds can be spent at. Those are the funds that go to state agencies. And just following up on this, in each of these institutions, the children must be 21 or younger, entitled to a free public education through grade 12, and enrolled in a regular program of instruction for the required length of time. Okay, and that is 15 hours per week in an adult correctional facility or 20 hours per week in an institution or community day program for neglected or delinquent youth. And here, the key term is regular program of instruction, and that means an education program consisting of classroom instruction in basic school subjects, your core subjects, reading, math, or vocationally oriented subjects supported by state funds. And there's a little disclaimer here, which I hope is not necessary in Oklahoma, but you never know. Neither the manufacture of goods within the institution nor activities related to maintenance are considered classroom instruction. So getting to the part that will regard more districts, or more of the people on this call, LEAs then receive Title I Part D Subpart 2 funds based on the number of students reported in the October count. And these students are ages 5 through 17. They live in a locally operated facility and are not counted under Subpart 1. So they're not in the DOC or OJA system. They live in an institution for at least 1 day during a 30-day period. And in Oklahoma, that 30-day period is October 1st through October 30th. Those are the days we count in the October count, but we'll get to that in a minute. Children are categorized as either neglected or delinquent based on the purpose of the facility. So occasionally it happens that there will be a detention center that in emergency situations will also be used as an emergency shelter. If you have somebody who's placed there for a few nights because there's not a place in a shelter, in the October count, they would be counted as delinquent because they're temporarily in a delinquent facility. The count is not based on what kids happen to be in the facility, but on the intended purpose of the facility. And finally, this basic principle to determine allowable uses of funds, basically in supplement, not supplant rules. The bottom line is the LEA must ensure that children and youth in the local correctional facilities are participating in an education program comparable to the one the LEA operates in the school that such children and youth would otherwise attend. So if the kids are in a facility, they can't leave, you still have to provide an education program that's comparable to what they would get if they were in the local school. And I'll go ahead and say, we know it's not going to be identical. The situation is very different, but comparable, meaning you have to cover your core subjects and you have to provide an education to these kids. Okay, furthermore, we'll get to the at-risk youth. If a school receives Subpart 2 funds and it's not a Title I Part A school, then the LEA can identify at-risk youth enrolled in its school from these categories and provide Title I services to them, even if it's not a Title I school. I mentioned these earlier. At-risk youth can be those who have been in the juvenile justice system and returned to a local LEA school, gang members, pregnant or parenting youth, children just at risk of failure or who have failed before, or kids who have dropped out of school in the past. So you can identify those as at risk and use Title I Part D Subpart 2 funds to provide Title I services to them, even if they're not enrolled in a Title I school. Okay, so use of funds. Some things are required and a lot of things are up to you. So required programs, state agencies, that's Department of Corrections and Juvenile Affairs, that receive Subpart 1 funds are required to spend between 15 and 30% of those funds on transition services. LEAs, on the other hand, have three main requirements. You're required to carry out high-quality education programs for the completion of high school, entering training or employment programs, or further education. So, education. Second requirement is to provide activities facilitating transition from correctional facilities back into mainstream schools or the workplace. And LEAs are required to operate some sort of dropout prevention programs for at-risk youth or youth returning from correctional facilities. In addition to that, we have some allowable uses of funds and some non-allowable uses of funds. So things you can spend the money on: after-school tutoring, or a liaison or coordinator that coordinates between the facility and the school district. You can hire paraprofessionals to work directly with the students, under the supervision of a teacher. Health and social services, supplemental classroom supplies and technology. Okay, this is above and beyond what is provided to all of the students in your district. If you want to provide extra, say, supplemental software programs or platforms, or if you're not providing devices to all of your students, you can use Title I funds to provide those devices to the neglected and delinquent students. You can also use these funds on supplemental counseling or mentoring, dropout prevention programs, vocational, technical life skills education. These are all perfectly acceptable and I would say even good things to spend your money on. Some things that you cannot use Title I funds on are teacher salaries for core instruction, because You're required to provide core instruction by the law, so that has to come out of your state and local funds. Supplies and materials for core content areas, same rationale. You're required, that's part of the required education, so that has to come out of state and local funds. Any item normally supplied in a regular classroom setting has to be provided to these kids as well before Title I-D funds kick in, or Title I-A neglected funds. Items to be used by students not considered neglected, delinquent, or at risk. So, when you're using these money, it has to be for these kids in the facilities. And then anything not directly related to education or transition. You can use some of the Title I-A neglected or Title I-D funds for administrative costs, and the calculation here is the same as for Title I-A, and it's based on your average daily attendance in larger districts with 1,500 students or more. You can spend 5% of your allocation on administrative costs. For districts with between 500 and 1,500, that rises to 7% of your allocation. And for districts with fewer than 500 students, you can spend up to 8% of your allocation on administrative costs. Okay, moving on now to some required paperwork. Contracts. LEAs serving neglected and or delinquent facilities are required to have a contract with each facility in which they provide instructional services. State agencies that seek educational services from an outside entity are required to have a contract with the service provider. The LEA or state agency exercises administrative control and assumes responsibility for monitoring the contract to ensure compliance with applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. Waivers. Okay, a little bit of background here. This is a policy that we started 2 years ago because basically to keep track of who is serving whom and to make sure all facilities are being properly served, and also to make sure that our reporting to the federal government is accurate and funding goes to the right places. Under normal circumstances, neglected and delinquent facilities are served by the LEA where the facility is located. There are, however, some situations where services are provided to a facility located outside the boundaries of the LEA providing the services. In these cases, the LEA that provides services must obtain a written waiver from the LEA within whose boundaries the facility is located. A copy of that waiver must then be sent to the state Title I Part D coordinator. Right now, that's me, at OSDE by May 31st, prior to the year in which the facility is to be served. And I believe this happened as it was supposed to this year. I got several waivers by May 31st. If you are serving a facility that's outside of your boundaries and you did not get or have not sent me such a waiver, please contact me because we'd like to know who is serving whom for our federal reporting purposes. There's, what do you call it, kind of a quirk in Oklahoma State education law that treats online programs a little differently. So under Oklahoma state law, neglected and or delinquent facilities can contract for, quote, remote internet-based courses with an LEA other than the one within whose boundaries the facility is located. Okay, nothing new here. In this case, though, under Oklahoma law, a waiver from the LEA where the facility is located is not necessary. I would say please let them know, however, that this is happening. The facility, however, shall inform the local LEA of its intention to contract with another LEA for internet-based services no later than May 1st of the fiscal year prior to that in which such services are to be rendered. And please send a copy of that letter to me or the Title 1D coordinator if roles should change by May 31st. And there is one instance this year where that didn't happen, but it's okay. A facility actually physically moved to a new location over the summer, and they didn't know that was going to happen by May 1st, but notification was made in a timely manner, so that was okay. But the gist of this here is, in the past, we had a facility that informed its local LEA the week before school started that it had gone with a different, with a charter school to provide services. LEA had already hired a teacher to teach there, and it kind of wreaked a little bit of havoc with their budgeting because then they had an extra teacher on the payroll that they couldn't use. Okay, and this all brings us all to the October count. The October count is the annual neglected and delinquent survey. It's a sort of a census. All districts in the state participate in this. Even if you have no neglected or delinquent students, you can just report zeros, but everyone needs to participate. There are two distinct forms for reporting the October count. One for reporting a caseload of children and youths residing in facilities operated by a state agency, that is, ones that get subpart 1 funds, and another one for those residing in a locally operated facility or one operated by an LEA that gets subpart 2 funds. All LEAs and state agencies are required to report October caseload counts of children or youth for whom the LEA or the state agency provides an education and who reside in eligible local institutions. If the LEA has no institutions, you simply report a caseload of 0. The way this works is we have a 30-day period, and that's October 1st to October 30th. You keep a daily record of the number of overnight residents, age 5 through 17, and then at the end of the month, you look and you see the day with the highest number of overnight residents, the high water mark, and that's what you report. So perhaps you have a facility that with 16 beds, and for 28 days, only 8 of those were occupied, but for 2 nights, you had an extra 4 kids, and you had 12 kids there on those 2 nights, you would report 12. That was the number with the number of students that were there on the night that you had the most students. That's the number you reported. Okay, the forms have not changed from past years. So the one for state agencies has a box for name and address of the agency, the name and address of the facility, then the name and address of the agency, some questions, just yes or no questions to verify that this is a qualifying institution, and then you put what type of institution you're reporting and the number of kids in that institution, either a 20-hour program for most of those or a 15-hour program for adult correctional facilities. There's a calculation to be made. You take the total number, you multiply it by the number of days per year that the program operates, and then divide by 180. Sorry about that, but I hope you have a calculator. And then that gives you a final adjusted number, which is what we will base your allocation on. The form for LEAs is a little bit simpler. There's a column where you put the name and your county district code of your LEA. the name of the facility or facilities that you serve. If it's a neglected facility, you say how many kids were in it in the neglected column. If it's a delinquent facility, same thing, you put them in the delinquent column, and then the totals for each facility at the bottom, the district totals, so the totals for neglected kids, total of delinquent kids, and overall total. Then there is a page for superintendent's signature and a date. And there's a box if it's a facility that you've been serving for a while and the number of kids has changed, either gone up or down by more than 25%, then just a word of saying why you think this is happening. So we have an idea. And then you're good. You take that form and you scan it and you send it to this email address that we have set up called ndoctobercount@sde.ok.gov. And you send that to us by November 12th. Okay. Again, these forms will be going out next week in Engage OK. Probably do that twice. I will also send them directly to all superintendents, so everybody should have them. And if you have any questions about it, you can contact me at thomas.kirk@sde.ok.gov, or my work phone number is 405-521-4878. I am almost always in the office nowadays, although today I happen to be working from home. If you call on a day that I'm working from home, I do get a voicemail that goes straight to my computer at home, so I will get back to you. I have some resources here. I'm not going to go into all of this right now, but there are some pretty good sources on administering programs, also some ideas about what works and what doesn't in educational terms. And if you want a copy of this PowerPoint, I'd be happy to send it to you, and you can follow up on some of those links yourself. Okay, at this point, I will open the chat box and take any questions that might have come up. Okay, I have one here. What would a liaison coordinator be called, or the name of their job title? I think most often it's a facility liaison, or be the neglected liaison. There's any variety of job titles out there, but often that will be a district person who has a portion of their job, or perhaps extra hours, to coordinate education with the local facility. So another question, Tom, is the facility able to set the schedule for schooling, or should the district intervene if a shortened schedule is well below even alternative school schedule? Okay, you have to meet the number of hours, the prescribed number of hours for the school year. A lot of facilities are on a 12-month basis rather than a 9-month basis, so they'll do fewer hours during the week. But we want to see 20 hours a week, except in adult correction facilities. They can have 15, but we'd like to see a minimum of 20. Some LEAs mirror the local district schedule and have from 8 to 3:30, something like that, every day during the school year. Others spread that out over the summer, but you have to have that minimum number of hours that's prescribed by law. So if you know of a facility, or there's a facility in your district that is not doing that, please let me know. We need to intervene. That has happened. We've had to intervene with the county jail that was not doing that. But they do have to maintain at least 20 hours a week of school. I would like PowerPoint, please. Also, some other people. If you would like a copy of the PowerPoint, will you please send me a message to my email, and I will bring that up, that address up here, and I will be happy to send that to you. I forgot to mention earlier that in monitoring, we ask for transition plans and program evaluation. So one of the required activities is to have some kind of transition to help kids go from a facility back into your regular schools or into some kind of job setting. We've developed some templates for those if you don't have a plan right now in your district, or you kind of bounce around from year to year. There are templates in this year's monitoring toolkit that you're welcome to borrow and adapt as you like. The templates for evaluating the program in a neglected or delinquent facility, and a template for transition services. And if you don't have a copy of the monitoring toolkit, I would be very happy to send that to you as well. So if you want PowerPoint, if you want the monitoring toolkit with those forms, let me know and I will get those to you before the end of the day.